the future council will continue to struggle with holding the police department accountable to spending within its limits, in large part because the failure of my abrogation amendment means the future mayor and permanent chief will have the budget by which to hoard nearly $20 million worth of general fund dollars during a historic, once-in-a-lifetime global pandemic.
Well, that's Seattle City Council President Lorena Gonzalez with some words of warning about police funding as the City Council puts to rest the city's $7 billion budget for 2022. Plenty of frustration to go along with this year's budget approval vote. We're going to break down some of the reasons why. We'll talk about that land swap of City Hall Park and even a decision about counting our homeless residents in Seattle and King County that may raise just a few eyebrows. All that and more on the post-Thanksgiving episode of the Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. Brian Callanan here with you. I am a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own, and I am joined once again by Kevin Schofield, my co-host here from Seattle City Council Insight. Kevin, I think the one thing that I'm always thankful for this time of year is that the city's budget process is finally over. So much angst and angst was packed in the last couple of months here. How are you feeling about it?
I am glad it's over. Maury Salisbury from Converge Media and I did this whole budget school series. I'm glad we did it,
right.
And got some good information. Hopefully, people were able to engage in a way that they haven't before. But
right.
I am so glad it's over.
Yeah. Deep breath in and then bring it back out. There you go. Well, thank you, sir. Thanks also to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. The best coffee you will find on the first floor of City Hall. So please do support them. Other small businesses too. Thank you to owners John and Riley for supporting our show. Thanks also to our patrons. Thanks to our supporters, everybody else out there. And if you're able, please do become a patron of the show. Jump in at the $10 level on Patreon, and we will send you your very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews coffee mug. Make sure you get on board with that. Our mugshot of the week comes from James and Mary, who sent in this lovely Thanksgiving-themed photo of their mug in action. Thank you for sending that in. And everyone, please do become a patron of the show at any level you can. We would surely appreciate the support. A special thanks to Converge Media as well. The video version of our podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get rolling with Right Here, Right Now. All right, Kevin, let's put this budget finally to bed here. We heard about it last week. I just want to get some final takeaways from this 2022 budget. And if we can, let's start with housing, because it really does look like the council is trying to make a push on homelessness, affordable housing, this $194 million investment in affordable housing units, $10 million more in tiny house villages. Homelessness, clearly the top issue for people in Seattle and all over King County, our state for that matter. What kind of impact do you think this investment from the city is going to have?
Well, long term, it's going to have an important investment, right? And this is one of the big issues with homelessness, right? Is that do you focus their money on the long term thing, or do you focus your money on the short term thing, or do you try to do a little bit of both and bridge them, right? The long term need is affordable housing, right? And homelessness will be with us until there's enough affordable housing, and we're not even close to having enough right now. At the same time, it takes years to build it. So especially at the scale that we need. So until then, how much money to put into the short term, into the emergency shelters, into the treatment programs, into the other things that we need to do so that when there are places for people who are currently homeless to move, we have ways to get them off the street, stabilized, and get them prepared to move into those places, right? So it's a really tough balance to figure out how much to put into each of those and what the right mix is of them. But absolutely, right? Homelessness will be with us until we have enough affordable housing.
Right. And this just really speaks to, I remember talking to Mark Dones about this a little bit, and their concern about this was definitely this idea of bridge housing, trying to find some place when you're actually doing the outreach. You have some places for these people to go, like shelters, that next level up, that bridge housing that will get people from a shelter into something more permanent in the future. We just don't have that online right now. And I think that's one of the main, or I guess one of many choke points in the system when it comes to moving people through our housing system.
Right. And, and there's different kinds of bridge housing that we need.
Right. Yeah.
Right? There's,
dealing with addiction and behavioral health services.
Yeah. There are treatment programs for behavioral health. One could look at tiny home villages as one potential kind of bridge housing, right? Get people back in the community and get them stabilized, right? And get them stabilized long enough that we can just assess them and figure out what their needs are, what are the kind of programs we need to plug them into. Are they going to need permanent supportive housing, or are they going to be able to live more independently? So getting people to a place where we can do that kind of assessment is a critical part of this process as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Well, let's do this if we could, Kevin. I want to move back to this police funding piece because we heard from Council President Gonzalez at the top of the show. She was very concerned about what the council was not able to accomplish this budget session, and that is change the way the SPD does its accounting and budgeting. Unlike any other department in the city, you've pointed this out on SCC Insight, I know, a number of times, Kevin. The SPD has this budget payroll that is well above their needs. It's based on that position authority, the maximum amount of people the SPD can hire, and that number is not even close to the amount of actual sworn officers here. This battle, Kevin, over officer attrition, rectifying those numbers with the police budget really not going away. I think it's going to be a big issue for the council with this budget year ahead, and I know that's a year off, but also for incoming Mayor Bruce Harrell, too.
Well, at the end of the day, the city council gets the final word on the budget.
Yeah, right.
And having the higher position authority, which means in practice, that with 100 more positions and they could possibly fill in the next 2 years.
Yes.
And by default salary funding going along with them.
Yes.
Which, in the budget that just got passed, Mayor Durkin decided to take $19 million of that salary savings, or I guess almost 18 million of it, and apply it to other things. Right. Mayor-elect Harrell can decide to do that next fall, and the city council can undo it. It's a question. It's just simply a question of, do we not let that happen in the first place?
Yeah.
Or do we let it happen and then the city council has to unwind it?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Either way, the city council will get the final word on this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's interesting, though. I just think about the mechanics behind it. You're absolutely right about the city council's role in all this, but I think about Mayor-elect Harrell, and then I think about a big decision he's going to have to face when he comes into office, which will be selecting a new police chief. I'm not sure if he's going to want to go with interim Chief Diaz or what happens there, but I think there's a lot of moving pieces around this police budget piece looking forward here. Any thoughts on that moving forward?
Well, okay, so just on selecting the police chief, there is a process that's specified for how it's supposed to happen. Right. Where he has to basically create a search committee, and they have to go take applications, narrow it down to 10, and then using a process narrow it down to, I guess it's 3 to 5, and then the mayor picks from them. Right. So there is a semi-public process that needs to be followed. It's not just as if Mayor Harrell can just say, "I'm going to go with Chief Diaz."
Yes,
Chief Diaz may not make the top 10. We'll see.
Be on a list. Yeah. Any other thoughts here, Kevin? Just as a wrap up on the budget, I think it was definitely interesting to see that back and forth with the police, but I know a lot more to this whole process. Some final thoughts.
Right,
here.
and a couple thoughts on the police part. They did reinstate the funding for the community service officer program.
That was big.
Right? Mayor Durkin had proposed expanding it by another 6 CSOs, and the council initially kept that, but before the end, they put that back.
Brought it back.
So that's a good thing. They didn't restore some other funding, so that's going to be an ongoing, issue. To Harold's point that they're going to, and Gonzalez's point that they're going to have to continue to fight. Councilmember Swan put forward a couple of last-minute amendments. One, a second try at her amendment from the previous week that would have increased the payroll tax by 50%.
Yes, right.
450 million more into affordable housing, about 85 million more into Green New Deal project. That did not pass.
Right.
Sawant did her customary traditional protest no vote on the final budget, so it passed by an 8-1 vote. So
there it was, and
I guess to wrap it up, I would say, as the saying goes, when all is said and done, there's a lot more said than done.
Yes, one of your best, Kevin, one of your best. Very true, very true. So thank you for that breakdown here. But I wanted to follow up on another story that you might have missed, folks, last week if you were watching everything that was happening on the budget here. I wanted to talk a little bit about what was happening with City Hall Park, a land swap that went on here. Mayor Durkin, Executive Constantine signed this deal for a land swap. The county is taking over City Hall Park, that piece of land that is just to the south of the King County Courthouse. The city is getting some land from the county in the South Park area. The council now has to approve this. It's going to need a public hearing too. And remember the backstory on this. Big homeless encampment at this park, number of different public safety concerns. The city shut down the park, gated it off back in August. It appears this whole land swap looks legit in many ways. The city getting much more land than it's giving up to the county. But Kevin, I always think about this. What sort of commentary is this when it comes to the city's homelessness policies on encampments, and how is the county's approach going to be different? Just some overall thoughts. What do you make of this,
I
Steve?
have no idea how the county's
Yeah.
approach is going to be different. So now
Yeah.
instead of, Seattle City Park, Seattle Parks and Recreation Department, and Seattle Police, now it's going to be King County Sheriff and King County Parks.
Right.
But the problems are still the same, right?
Yeah.
Although there is potentially some talk that long term they're going to redevelop it as part of sort of the King County
I've heard that
campus,
too.
right?
Yeah.
You mentioned it's south of the courthouse.
Yep.
It's west of the King County Administration Building.
Yep.
Right. So it is kind of in the middle of their campus. Are they going to redevelop that as part of as part of their county administration campus?
Yeah.
They might decide to do that. In the short term though, will they keep it fenced off the way it is right now? Or are they going to open it up again? And then, if the tents move back,
what happens then?
Are they gonna have the same issues? Well, my guess is they will have the same issues. They may not choose to deal with them the same way, but we'll see.
Right. Very, very interesting. And I just wanted to follow up on this whole public hearing piece that the city council has to do here. Can the council jam this in this last part of December before they go on their recess? I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out too.
Yeah, they have they have 3
just about 3 weeks
city council meetings left. So they could do it.
Yeah. Okay.
And they could push it through faster if they really need to. They're not, by their rules, they're not supposed to have the public hearing, do the final vote on the same day, but they can waive their own rules and decide to do it. But they still have time. They'll get it done. So they have to do this, for a couple of reasons. There is a rule. There's a law that says that, and it was actually voter approved, that said that the city cannot get rid of parks land unless it gets an equivalent amount of parks land back
in return from that,
right? So as part of this deal, it's giving up City Hall Park, but it's getting a number of properties back mostly in South Seattle along the Duwamish River and some other places that it can easily turn into park spots. So, and in fact, it's getting, as you mentioned, in terms of just raw acreage, it's getting more acreage
much more
than City Hall Park.
Right.
So it's got some interesting properties you'll be able to do some things with. And so the overall total amount of parkland is actually going to go up.
Yeah. Right. That's a good thing for the city.
Yeah.
Sure.
And that's a good thing. So, but they, to cross the T's and dot the I's, they have to do a public hearing on this as well.
Okay. Well, we'll see how that plays out over the next couple weeks, and interesting to see what issues come up at that public hearing. So we'll check that out. But up next, the new King County Homelessness Authority says it will not be taking part in the annual one-night count of unsheltered people. So how's that a good thing? We're going to break it down with Now Hear This. Okay, some interesting news last week. The new King County Regional Homelessness Authority, which really starts its work in the early part of 2022 here, announced it would not have a so-called point-in-time count of homeless people in mid-January. Now, HUD requires this count for federal funding in odd-numbered years. King County usually does this annually. It did not do so last year, got a waiver because of challenges from COVID, and it's an even year this year, so it's not required. Now, I spoke with Mark Dones recently on City Inside Out on Seattle Channel. They are the new head of the RHA, and they're talking about retooling a number of processes, from data collection to managing grant dollars, and they're going to look a little bit different this year.
I think that's one of the hopes that people had for the authority, right? That
make it more transparent and more accountable. Sure. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, some of just the way that we are doing our grants management, I think is going to look different for people and, frankly, produce different, to your point, data availability and be able to say, sort of what money is going where and why.
Kevin, just on this one night count to start here, a tough pill to swallow for some people who would say, wait a minute, we need a good count of our homeless population. But the other side of this is this number has been constructed out of some very questionable data for quite some time here. The methodology has changed, a lot of different issues here. Break down your thoughts about this whole one night count and how it's changed over the years.
Yeah, so the methodology, I've written about this several times, is definitely suspect. King County changed the way it did it starting in 2017. So between 2017 and 2019, it collected 3 years of doing this. But what those 3 years showed was that the number of people they find depends very heavily on the number of people they have out on that night.
The amount of volunteers,
right. So if it's a bad weather night and they have a hard time finding people, and they have a hard time, a lot of volunteers just don't show up,
Right.
then they find fewer people.
Yeah.
And so it's and as Mark Doan said in some of his press releases around this last week, it is an undercount, right? We know it's an undercount. When they come back with a number, it's not like they're making up people, right? Everybody they find are actual people. So if they say there are 11,500 people, there are at least 11,500.
Right. Yeah.
But in 2018, they came back and said, hey, the number has gone down from what we found in 2017. So we've seen like a 5% reduction in homeless in the county. And it's like, no, actually, there's no reason to believe that is true at all. Right?
Yeah.
And then when they take some subset of the folks and they do a deeper survey with them.
Yes.
But it looks like there's some methodology problems with it too. It looks like there's what would be called sampling bias, that it isn't just a random set of people, that the people that are easier to find, people staying in shelters and things like this, tend to be more of the people that they're actually surveying with it. Right. So the numbers aren't necessarily representative. And you see from year to year big shifts in the numbers for these questions that they're asking in the in-depth survey, which really kind of makes it more suspect. But now, the other side of this is that, and Publicola did some interesting reporting on this last week. This whole every other year thing, it's a little questionable exactly sort of what the rules are, because the Regional Homeless Authority said we have to do this in odd numbered years.
Yes.
And apparently what HUD is saying, the Federal Housing and Urban Development Department is saying is, no, you have to do it every other year. And we gave you a waiver last year, which means you got to do it this year. Coming out. And so, and now, what's at risk there is some amount of federal funding. And it doesn't mean if they don't do it, they won't get any. Right. But they'll probably get marked down on priority a little bit.
I see. Okay.
Right. So, in practice, what does that really mean? It's hard to say. Right?
And I guess I'm just trying to figure out what that will mean in terms of making some assessments, because Mark Doan very much wants to modernize the approach that our region is taking to homelessness. And I think a big part of that is actually going out and making sure they're connecting with people there in a very real way. He's talked about a by name list, trying to identify those specific people who are out there and really track the outcomes for those different people by name. That's a lot of work that Mark Doan is talking about there. But really, I think that's the whole piece here. How do you modernize this system? And that's a big question.
On one hand, there's a school of thought which says that the ultimate solution to sort of this county part is to have a full, what they call by name list, right? Where everybody who's homeless in the county is listed in the homeless MIS system, right? They're an individual listed in that system and clearly identified. So what that also allows is then as they go and get services in different places, they're information about them and their history and their issues and whether if there's a caseworker working with them, who that caseworker is when they show up in a new place. So we can just connect the dots on somebody and sort of provide what you might call better wraparound care for them.
And just to jump in real quick on that, and it's important to have that identification, because a lot of times these people don't have an official ID, like a license, social security number, or whatever else. Keep going, please.
So there's that. But then the flip side is the privacy side. And some of them, don't necessarily want to be tracked by the system or have built enough distrust in having been, let down, discarded, treated poorly in the system in the past. They're like,
why do I want to make this connection?
Be part of that anymore. You're not going to sort of, I don't want you to track me anymore. Right? I don't trust you guys at all. I don't trust the government. You've done bad by me several times, and you can kind of sympathize with that. Right?
Sure. I get it.
And to the point you were just making, a lot of them don't have driver's license or other form of government issued ID, and if we give them a card that says here's your by name list card, then
what is that going to do?
Are they going to be able to keep that, or are they going to lose it, or is it going to get swept in a sweep of a homelessness? At some point? Right. That happens often. Right. So then do you go to some kind of biometrics, in which case you got all sorts of new privacy issues that come along with that.
Right.
So to just say, we're going to have a by name list with everybody in it, it is much, much more complicated than that to try to come up with a system that really works and does right by everybody.
and is transparent too. I think that's been a
And is
huge
transparent.
concern for so many people in our region. Hey, we're putting all this money in. Where's it going? Who's it serving, or whatever else? And I think that's a piece of this too. If you have that good data, you can match it up with the dollars. At least I think is where
Yeah,
Mark Jones
yeah,
is going
yeah,
with this.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. We'll see where that pans out. All right, I wanted to quickly check in on something else from last week that also has some future repercussions. King County Executive Dow Constantine appointed a new sheriff to replace Mitzi Johanknecht on January 1st. It's Patty Cole Tyndall, previously an undersheriff in the sheriff's office, will take this interim role until the executive appoints a permanent sheriff in mid-2022. This is a really interesting story to me, Kevin, because King County is transitioning into this appointing rather than electing mode. Dow Constantine actually told me on the campaign trail he would even consider someone not in law enforcement to take up this role. I guess I'm sort of looking ahead with this one, Kevin, and at a high level, what sort of debate are you expected to see as this appointment process unfolds? What impact does this have as other law enforcement agencies around our region check it out? What do you think about this decision?
I think we're going to see many of the same issues that we saw with the last selection of the chief of police here in Seattle, which, by the way, we're also going to be doing in the next,
that's right.
Next 6 months, right?
Yeah.
Mayor Terrell is going to have to choose that, and that's got a whole process that needs to be followed as well. So, and it's going to be interesting to see the two of. In fact, we'll probably see
almost a side by side. Yeah.
As they go side by side. Dow Constantine is probably a little ahead, right?
Yeah.
They've he said he expects to nominate somebody around March.
Yes.
And then the King County Council has to approve it.
Review that.
You know, it would be an interesting twist if he chose somebody that wasn't from law enforcement. I'm guessing that the King County Council would probably have a tough time approving that.
Yeah.
Particularly since that council is much more. There are several, people much further to the right. On the King County
moderate
Council,
voices there for sure.
Than there are on the Seattle City Council, right? So while there's certainly a lot of backing in the King County Council and with King County Executive Constantine for reform in the police and the sheriff's office. And they've already made some moves in that direction, including this one of appointing instead of electing the sheriff.
Right.
How far are they willing to go with that? So the new interim sheriff is the first person of color to be King County sheriff. That's a huge deal. Is that a precedent that the county is going to want to see continued in whoever is selected as a permanent sheriff?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a big issue too. And I think about this just looking at these two agencies side by side. I know the King County Sheriff's Office has had some officer attrition, not as much as SPD over the last year and a half here, but for some reason the debate around that doesn't seem as fierce in the halls of county government as it does in city government there. And the county did figure out some way to put some hiring bonuses into their budget or whatever else too. So I don't know, this whole issue of law enforcement, how it's handled at the county level, I really think that the SPD, certainly SPOG, is going to be keeping a close eye on this, and our city government's going to be keeping a close eye on this too. It's going to be very interesting to see these two parallel processes together.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if they end up competing for people.
Yeah, right.
Are there officers that will move back and forth between those two?
Yeah, that's true. Right.
And if we end up with a Seattle police chief who's to the left and a King County sheriff who's to the right,
here we go.
Is that going to be the sorting function for the officers, right?
Where they want to go? Sure.
Are all the redder ones going to go to the county sheriff, and all the bluer ones going to go to the city
SPD.
of Seattle?
Yeah. Wow.
I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. This is going to be super interesting going forward. Well, thank you for breaking that down with me, Kevin. All right. Well, the race is on to jam in a few more city council priorities before the end of the year. We're going to wrap that up on What's Next. Kevin, this is always an interesting time of year for city politics. A bit of a hangover after the budget process, but still some work that needs to get done here. I mentioned that public hearing that the city council is going to be jamming in when it comes to that land swap for City Hall Park. We might see another push for rent control for Councilmember Sawant as she continues to fight against a recall vote on December 7th. But you've been following some changes the council is trying to make on its rules and procedures. What's going on here?
Well, yeah, this is something that they do either annually or every other year.
Yes,
There's
right.
really, in some ways, kind of a turnover of the city council every 2 years, right?
Yeah, right,
Because
right.
we have an election for some subset of the council every 2 years. This
Yes.
is kind of a smaller, reset for them because they're only having really one member, well, maybe two, depending on what happens with the Sawant recall,
Yeah, right.
turnover between now and next year. But
Mhm.
they're going to end up shuffling their committee assignments
Yeah,
around.
right.
They're going to, there's going to be a new council president. There
Mhm.
may be a new budget chair. We'll see what happens
Right.
with all that.
Mhm.
So this is also, the time when they annually look at, do we need to make changes to our rules and procedures for just how the city council runs its meetings,
Right,
for
right,
how it
right.
just sort of runs everything behind the scenes.
Mhm.
So Council President Gonzalez has been running this process, and apparently she's collected some, suggestions from her colleagues, and they put in with the help of the city clerk, because the city clerk's office actually runs a lot of the process, and that's where
True.
the council parliamentarian works and all that. So they've got a document with a bunch of potential changes. Now, a lot of them are, very low level kind of parliamentary procedure nuance, little shifts
Sure.
here or there.
Mhm.
One of the issues that they changed 2 years ago
Mhm.
was they changed their model for committee membership, right?
Yes,
It used to
okay.
be that
Mhm.
every city council member was a member of every committee.
Yeah,
Right. And
yeah.
there were certain members who were expected to show up, but any
Right.
city council member could show
Could
up
show
to any
up at any
meeting
time. Yep.
and propose an amendment to a bill and could
Mhm.
end up voting on that bill. Right.
Yep,
So,
yep.
what does quorum look like? Do
Yeah,
you, how do you whip the votes for something in committee when you don't really know how many people are going to be there?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So the 2 years ago, they changed it to say, no, there are specific members of every committee, and that's how you determine quorum. And that's how, and only those official committee members
Yeah.
can vote,
Yep,
can
yep,
propose
yep.
amendments or can vote on amendments. Right.
Yep,
So
yep.
if you're not a member of that committee,
Mhm.
if the chair invites you, you can come and maybe she'll call on you or he will call on you to say something.
Right.
You can't propose anything and you can't.
Right.
And, they've done some courtesy things around there where, the committee chair will propose amendments on behalf of a non-committee member.
I see. Right.
So they've done a little bit more kind of tweaking of
Okay.
what the powers, I mean, they're staying with that model. They haven't gone
Yeah.
back to the old model.
Yeah.
But they've done a little bit more tweaking on that, and they've handled a couple of edge cases, like every committee has a certain number of official members, and then an alternate in case one of the official members isn't there, and the alternate only gets to show up and vote and submit amendments if one of the full members isn't there.
Right.
Now, what happens if one of the full members is only present for part of a meeting?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does the alternate suddenly have power for part of the meeting? And what happens if halfway through the meeting, the regular member shows up again? So they're making like, oh, we got to figure all that out. So they're fixed up the rules around that, around alternates. They've, another thing they've really changed over the last 4 years is it used to be, if you go back 5 years, it used to be that in committee, if there was a divided vote on a bill being voted out of committee, then it had to wait 2 weeks before it showed up at full council.
Yes.
And there was what was called a divided committee report that was written that went to all the council members to say, basically, here are the two sides of this issue. Here's for and here's the against.
Right.
A couple of years ago, they changed those rules to say, well, you only get to, we're only going to do a report if it's requested.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
By somebody in the minority on the committee.
I see. Okay.
So
tweaking that
a lot of them went away, and now they're actually, with this revision, they're kind of they're turning that knob even more. So there's going to be even fewer divided reports.
I see.
They're just
I see.
Less paperwork, less reporting.
Yeah.
So unless and I've certainly noticed. I'm not a huge fan of this change because I certainly noticed that when a lot of these bills divided reports get up to the full council, there's a lot, the other council members who aren't part of this committee, now that we have a situation where most of the council members are not members of most of the committees.
Right.
The other council members are really at a disadvantage, right? They haven't been there for part of that conversation. They don't really kind of know all the issues, and they end up spending a lot of time rehashing them. When it probably would have been nice just to have a report. On
Interesting.
things.
Huh.
Yeah.
Gosh, I thought it was weird when they changed that rule that the pitcher has to pitch to 3 batters in Major League Baseball, but this is This is the weeds, my man. But it's important stuff. I mean, this is how the different ordinances get crafted for the Seattle City Council. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. So, well, there you have it. Thank you for that, Kevin. We always like to wrap up our show with a taste of something good to have with your coffee on our Coffee Break podcast. So, Kevin, this time it is cherry tartlet time. We had a few of these. They're almost bite-sized. I hate to say it. You can really fit this almost all in your mouth. It's one of these situations, a question I'm almost afraid to ask. What really is in that reddish part there, laying beneath those layers of crust there? Pie filling is such a dangerous phrase. What's in there?
Well,
do I want to know?
You could basically just use jam.
Right? Yeah, that would probably be that's
jam, preserves, anything kind of in that space. You might want to thicken a little bit so that when it's baking, it doesn't sort of get all runny.
Okay.
The cool thing about tartlets, this is definitely the week for tartlets, right? Because everybody was making pie last week,
right?
And when you make pie, you end up with a whole bunch of extra dough, right? And then I always use that to make like little tartlets and mini pies and things like that. So it is definitely tartlet season.
All right. I love it. There's Thanksgiving, there's Christmas right in the middle, tartlet season. So now it's where it's at. Well, Kevin, I thank you for that as always. And thanks everybody for listening here. Thank you to our patrons. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you might listen. Again, please do support our show on Patreon. Always appreciated there. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. We will see you soon. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2021.